certain pursuits over others and says that it's much better to seek to get that role on a board of a company than to raise a family. And I don't think it's anyone's place to tell women what the right choices are. I think we need an equal society where people are free to make their own choices and not inhibited from following the path they want to do. But I certainly don't think women should be forced into doing things just because it will get a 50-50 split in a certain industry. And I don't think there should be a prescribed definition of femininity. Women, men, every skin color, age, religion, I think individuals should be free to pursue a life that they choose with consequences for bad choices, for example, infringing on other people's liberty, and rewards for good choices. No, I'm not a stay-at-home mum yet. I don't think I'd be very good at that. I'm pretty crap at ironing. But if I decide to one day prioritize motherhood over a career, I don't think any modern feminist or anyone has a right to tell me that's the wrong decision to make. And I think feminism used to be about freedom, liberation, and choices, and now I worry that it's becoming a little bit more about lecturing women what they can and cannot choose. So I don't think banning gender stereotypes from advertising is a good idea. I think it's condescending. I think the proposed definitions are very arbitrary. I'm not offended or harmed by women being depicted as loving and caring mothers on TV, and I don't think my male friends were held back by the Gillette advert. I think they were ticked off by it and probably won't buy their products anymore. That's the beauty of capitalism, and I think consumers should regulate these things, not the government. Thank you.
Thanks. So, when I was a kid, I loved TV commercials. It was my favorite part of the day. And this is because they depicted this world, which was in a way larger than life. Everything was more awesome on the TV commercials. The food looked better, people looked better. And my favorite commercial, do you remember Knight Rider? Yeah. There was a weird Greek commercial where supposedly Kid was stuck in the Greek mountains and a road service would come and kind of save the day, and David Hasselhoff would say, Efkaristo Express, with a broken Greek accent. Anyway, so you could say this imposed a very high standard for our crappy Volkswagen car. Like, Kid was so awesome, my car was not good. But actually, that's what's great in art. And advertisement used to be this form of art, that it was life as it could be, right? Not realistic, but a bit more extravagant, a bit more like out of the ordinary. Now, fast forward to today, we see that advertising tends to be this project of social engineering, that through advertising we need to pass messages, we need to show how woke we are. And is there a problem with this? Well, I think there is, and the problem starts when the state intervenes. Now, if we have to find a moment when this starts becoming a problem, or if we try to find what are the philosophical kind of starting point of this tendency, I would go to the 60s, and I think there was this phrase that became so catchy, which said, the personal is political. This is a phrase that was coined by some radical new leftists and some radical feminists in the 60s, and the idea was that politics do not end in the street. Politics continues at home. And there's something good to it in terms of, look, you have to support your values also in your intimate relationships, and I understand that. But let's take this phrase to its logical conclusion. The personal is political. Well, everything is personal, and now, fast forward to 2019, we found ourselves in a situation where everything is political. The razor you use, the TVs, the Oscars, everything. And what's the problem with everything being political? What does it mean that something is political? It means that the state can intervene and use coercion and force. And I'm perfectly fine with the state using coercion to defend me from an armed thug. But it's something completely different when the state uses coercion to protect me from the harmful spectacle of a model with a 32 size dress. Because this is a regulation in France that you cannot depict a model with a dress size below 32. Now, I'm not good in dress sizes, but I assume this is like very, very thin. Or you could say that, and why is this happening? What is the rationale behind that? The rationale is that if you see this unrealistic body image, your self-esteem is going to be harmed. And you could say that my self-esteem is going to be harmed when I see posters of Aquaman. Because you know, it's Jason Momoa. Like I think I'm quite okay with my body, but I'm not there yet. I'm not at Jason Momoa level. Here's the problem though. If I see a poster of Jason Momoa and this creates a problem in my self-image, this means that I have some problems that go deeper than that. And this is where it gets serious. Because everyone says we live in times where all these people have problems with their body image, and all these people have, you know, they say that things like anorexia, all these things start from this kind of problem with our self-esteem that is triggered by this unrealistic body image that we get from advertising or from the TV. But what does self-esteem actually mean? And I think this like mental health crisis, or quotation mental health crisis, has to do with the wrong understanding of self-esteem. Self-esteem means I can face the world and say I'm capable of dealing with reality. I understand what is happening, I have control of the situation, and I'm confident that I can use my mind to navigate the situation. What is the message that we get from dominant culture today? The message is that no, you cannot do this. The message is that this world out there is outside of your control. There are these monsters, there are these powers that are beyond our control. Capitalism, alienation, consumerism, or since the gender panel, like the man is out there to get you. What image does this create? A frightful image, an image that, oh my God, I cannot cope. Now, I see more correlation with this tendency and the rising crisis of self-esteem rather than people seeing kind of sexy six-pack abs on TV. And overall, I think in the advertising wars, and generally in the culture wars, there are two colliding worldviews that the one is opposite the other. There are two different mindsets. And since we're talking about advertising, it's impossible not to talk about the greatest advertiser of all time, who was, obviously, Don Draper from Mad Men. Although he's a fictional character, it doesn't matter, he's very good. So there's one episode in season 1, and there's this scene that perfectly portrays these different mindsets and these different worldviews. So Don, who is an advertiser, is visiting one of his many girlfriends. And there are this gathering of hippies and beatniks and countercultural new leftists in her living room. And they dislike Don for obvious reasons. He's wearing a suit, he's portraying like hegemonic masculinity, so the hippies are not happy with him. And they throw him all the bromides, you create false needs, you create a lie, and of course Don Draper very easily kind of dismisses them. But when he's about to leave, there's a very interesting dialogue taking place. There seems to be some noise outside and some police sirens. It's quite unclear what's happening. It's not something major. And as Don walks towards the door, one of the hippies with scared kind of wide eyes says, "You can't go out there." And Don reaches the door, stares at the hippie and very confident says, "I can, you can't." And I think this is a great metaphor. This is a great metaphor of these two worlds. On the one side, you have the people who say, the world is out there is scary. I'm overwhelmed by my emotions. I cannot make sense of the world, and I cannot, quote, go out there. These are the hippies. The problem is that today, these hippies are wearing suits. These are the people who control these regulations that Chloe mentioned. These are the people who think that we are incapable. To put it in Jordan Peterson kind of terms, it's like chaos versus order. Now, Don is a very flawed person in many ways, but compared to the hippies, he's personifying the world of order. Like, it's Apollo versus Dionysus. He's controlled, he's composed, he's reality-oriented, and he's very capable, very confident that he can go out there, that he can face the world. So, to sum up, I prefer to be definitely on the second side, on the side of order. And this is why I oppose regulations in advertising, on two grounds. The first ground is that they violate the property rights of those involved, of the person who is shooting the commercial and the person who is buying the commercial. Okay? The fact that we might think that this commercial is offensive, then I would say tough luck. A third party who should have the same say on whether an advertising is going to go on air as the say that party should have on whether I sleep with men on my bedroom or not. it's none of their business. It's only a business of those who are directly involved. And the second reason is, as you mentioned, that this creates a very pathetic view of us. I find it offensive that someone is actually going to say Nikos cannot cope with the body image of Jason Momoa. I'm better than that, and I can cope. Thank you. Yeah, how much time have we got?
About an hour.
Right. We could speak for more, but I have to leave at some, sorry. Yeah. Are we
Is there nobody coming up with an opposing view?
That's your job.
Oh, we've got to come up with it.
Yeah. Do you have one?
No, well, after that, no.
Yeah, I suppose you talk about reality oriented, but you know, kind of look at media representations don't represent balance, so then you get a skewed version of reality. So how do you understand reality? Because I like the argument of personal resilience, but and ability to cope with reality, but we can't really look to advertising to show us reality.
Mm-hmm.
I think the depiction of, let's take the example that they used when they announced the regulation of women doing housework, man sitting on the couch. No, that's not the case in every relationship or every family. I think the reason they chose that, though, is because it does play on a kind of reality. And often these stories depicted in arts and culture do have a basis in reality. But we're also seeing a new reality. I think things are changing a little bit. You wouldn't have seen a gay couple in an advertisement 20, 30 years ago. And so I think our reality does become portrayed, actually, in advertisements. And when it's not portrayed, so I don't think for example, the Gillette advert, I don't think that did portray the reality of society. So when that happens, there is this reaction, isn't there? There was an uproar because we all decided, felt like we had to say something, that no, that's not the reality. And so I do think these things do self-regulate, and we get closer to our lives being portrayed in a more accurate way by kicking up a fuss when they really clearly don't.
I suppose it gets complicated when around aesthetics. So something like slim models, where we kind of, for the last few decades, that's been really in fashion, and so that's been the ideal. That's quite hard. I mean, I suppose aesthetics feels like something that's almost objective. Obviously, you could debate that. Yeah, so I don't know how you break that down. I don't know how that self-regulates.
That's a really good point as well, because I do, unlike Nikos, I do think there is an impact on advertisements on particularly young women, and a lot of the evidence bears that out. But I don't know how to fix that. I don't think it can be fixed by a government. I think it has to be fixed by artists and societies themselves, and companies like Dove and so on, putting out more realistic representations of women, and then I want to buy their products. So I hope that that can be resolved by more companies realizing there is a market out there for actually putting real women in these clothes, and showing them all. Because the model thing is, it does really get to me, because we don't all look like that. And then it makes you feel like shit because you don't look like that, but nobody really looks like that unless you have like a full-time job with a personal trainer and stuff. So yeah, that's a difficult problem, and I'm not saying that it's not a problem, just that I don't think it's the government's role to fix it.
Just to clarify, I totally agree that a lot of people do, so I don't doubt for a minute that people do have these body image problems and these doubts. And I do believe that it has to do with what they see. But it also has to do with what you're taught to believe. Because if you're taught to believe that, for example, the moment you see something on TV, that this is something realistic. So, for example, where is the role of parenting there? Where is the role of the parent to explain to the kid, look, this is a world where it depicts things that are not to be taken 100% seriously. It's a bit like the Santa Claus. You could say, that's a nice story, but that's not what reality is. Also, there are still many commercials that I would agree they are sexist. And back in the day, they were ridiculously sexist. But I think we got the order wrong. It's first society changing, and so values in societies are changing, and this is reflected in advertising. It's not, I don't think it's the other way around. We cannot use advertising as like this vehicle of social engineering. And something came to my mind. I don't know where I'm going with that. I'm just going to throw it out there. Since my Marxist days, I was obsessed with socialist and Stalinist posters for some reason. I liked like Soviet propaganda out of curiosity. It's very interesting in a way. The first diversity and multiculturalists were the Stalinists. Go and see the Soviet posters. In every poster, you see someone who looks like being from the Democratic Republic of Mongolia, someone from the Democratic Republic of Ukraine, someone from the Democratic Republic of, I don't know where else. Which was completely fake, because if we know anything about Soviet Union, minorities were severely persecuted. So the thing that we see today, I would say sometimes it's also a bit shallow. It has become this PR thing. Again, nothing wrong with that, but I don't think that change, that the very real change that you have mentioned, which is to be celebrated, of women expanding their horizons of what is possible and society accepting that, I think it starts with a change in values, and then all this is portrayed in popular culture. Again, these are just thoughts, not 100% sure where we're getting there. Yes?
Don't you think that sometimes the regulations defeat themselves? Because, like, let's say for the TfL, that's running all this regulation about not putting fast food in the advertisements, but at the same time they glorify when someone is putting some overweight person in an advertisement and saying, look, this is really good. Look, you should be comfortable with who you are, because even if you're overweight, that's fine, that's cool, that's all right. So it's like, yeah, but you said to me that's bad to eat this kind of food, and at the same time it's good to be overweight just because you're selling a raw or whatever it is. So isn't it a contradiction in itself?
Well, there's definitely a body responsible for regulating like junk food advertisements. So isn't that ironic? There's a bureaucrat responsible for making sure we don't see junk food, we don't eat junk food. There's also a bureaucrat responsible for body image and making sure we don't feel bad about being fat. I just think that what this shows is an increased instinct that there is a problem in society or a problem in our lives, and the government needs to come in and fix it, or somehow the state needs to construct the perfect society by, if we only introduce so many regulations and have so many bureaucrats working on this, we can solve all of these perceived problems. And if you come from the worldview that the state has no government, it has no role in doing that, like Nikos and I, it just seems crazy. But this is the current zeitgeist at the moment. I don't know how we fix that. I mean, there are great events such as these, but we're in the minority of public opinion, or of the decision makers right now. And so with the online harms legislation, when some of us raised some concerns about that, they said, oh, so you like extremist content and you think that people should be exposed to extremist content? I said, no, I think the legislation is so overreaching that you're going to be regulating stuff that isn't extreme. And that's a problem with the government getting involved too much. But yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that, but...
Just fighting the contradiction, because for me it's quite obvious.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You mentioned Gillette. Did you see a recent tweet by Gillette, which is portraying a woman who is...
He's being very careful.
No, fat. No. She's clearly overweight. That's the whole point. And it says something like, go girl. But then if you see the next tweet, it's like a thread. It says, don't feel obliged by the quotation rules. So here's my problem with that. A, it's not a rule that being very, very, very overweight is kind of not good for you. Any doctor is going to say, no, this is a problem. Now, there's nothing wrong with someone who is overweight, morally wrong, right? They might have an issue with their metabolism, whatever. But saying that this is, more power to you, and this goes against the rules, it's what I said earlier. That's like the hippie. The hippie saying, in the scene with Don Draper, he's saying there are no standards. There is nothing. There is no reality, basically. Everything is up in the air. Everything could be this way or that way. So That's why I found this a bit weird. And there's another issue there. Maybe the underlying image is, if we lower the bar of what your self-image should be, then we're going to boost people's self-esteem, which I think is destructive. It's not even neutral, it's not even wrong, it's destructive. Because if my life is not going anywhere, right? And I've been in such situations in my life, but then I hang out with people who are telling me, oh, you're doing good, everything is okay. Or, who cares, who cares, life is just a journey, don't worry if things are not going well. I think that's the worst thing that could happen to me. So, maybe if someone is struggling with their self-esteem, and you show them someone which is considered, that the standards are low, you're not helping that person. Actually, you're directing them in the wrong direction, which says that your self-esteem is going to come from outside. You're telling that your self-esteem is going to come from other people not looking as good as you'd hope you'd look. Whereas again, self-esteem comes from within. And this is not like the new age narcissistic, oh, I'm good, we're all special. No, it's that the way I think and the way I act in life, I'm confident that I can face the world. And this is where self-esteem comes from. That's why I didn't like at all this ad by Gillette. Again, this is nothing against people who might struggling with their weights. I'm doing sometimes things that are not good for my health. Occasionally I'm a smoker. But if Gillette would have an ad which has like a chain smoker and says, more power to you, the hell with the rules, then I'd say, no, that's not cool.
I think it'd be cool. No.
I think it would be cool.
Well, but there's got to be, because you made a good point about like the ideal, and we want to see the ideal portrayed in culture. So we want to see the ideal family, the ideal life. Just to play devil's advocate, you mentioned that the massively overweight person would not be an ideal.
Yes.
And I totally agree. But also the massively underweight, anorexic ideal is also unhealthy. That's and so we're in this bizarre situation where, I think culture at the moment has, it's either one or the other, isn't it, on these magazines? Whereas I'd just like to see more like really good-looking, normal people, if there is such a thing. But I think, then again, I think the market's already providing that. I think there are more brands that realize if they do present something that's a bit different, they'll get my money.
Can I say one more thing on that? Don't quote me on this. This is completely not off the record, but this is not based on any research or anything. I was always finding weird that people consider that the beauty image is a very, very, very thin woman. At least where I grew up, we consider the ideal woman Monica Bellucci, which has anything to do with this very, very thin. So I always struggle to understand why people said that this model of female beauty is a super thin woman. Or if this is the case, I don't think this has much to do with patriarchy, because patriarchy, if there is such a thing, did never seem to encourage this. So you could say this has to do with the fitness, with the fashion industry, but I'm not even sure that this is like the image. And the other thing with the, one more thing on the ideal, and why I think it is important to have higher standards. Okay, I'm going to quote Jordan Peterson again, and people are going to think like I love him. I don't, right? I have many issues, but I think the best line in the 12 Rules for Life, he talks about this statue. What statue is this? Is this very famous one? Is it the, sorry? Yes. So, and the idea with this statue is, Peterson says this statue offers you a challenge. It's demanding. This statue is demanding. This beauty is demanding. It's telling you, you can do better. It's telling you, you can do better in life. Try harder. Okay, I could say that this is kind of too much. Yeah, maybe it is too much. But if we want to achieve our absolute, if we want to achieve as much as we can, we shouldn't see this statue of beauty as kind of limiting. We should see it as a challenge to rise up. Now, this doesn't mean, again, that the ideal should become as thin as you can. This is a general rule in life about standards, okay? If your number one value in life is to be, I don't know, thin, well, this is debatable whether this is good or not. But talking about standards and ideals in general, I think having high standards and having high ideals, it can only make you better. It can only make you a better person. That's my opinion on that. The gentleman at the back had his hand up, I think.
Yeah, so my question was, why do you think advertisers today are portraying things like they are? as the ideals rather than reality. Why would you see that this is being improved by the advertising agency and the brand, and rather than someone opposing it? Is it because those people who are now wearing the suits and making those decisions were back from that mindset? Is it because it's more because everyone is very subjectivist and they feel guilty about it, so they want to do something that might be morally approved? Is it virtuous signaling from brands? Why do you think people decide to effectively go down this route, as Nike did with Travis Kalanick?
Yeah. Nicholas made a really great point, which is that it starts in society and then is reflected in our art. And companies want to make money. And so they know that they will make a lot of money if they say or portray what is a popular worldview. And so I think that you see a lot of woke capitalism now, where if there is a prevalent view in society with a particular target market, so for example, young people who overwhelmingly have the worldview that, that they're victims or whatever, I think they just want to make money. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So if we want to change the way the advertising's going, then we need to change our society, not the other way around, because companies will just advertise in a way they know which will make them money. And if being woke is popular with the people, they're going to do that kind of stuff and be very political to make money.
Speaking about standards, that beard is a standard for me. It makes me feel inadequate beard-wise. So I think this is the million-dollar question, and I haven't got the answer, and I'm very curious what people think. So when Gillette, for example, did this advertising, they knew they would alienate 50%. Is it that someone said, this is going to bring us money because everyone's going to talk about Gillette? If this was the case, I would say, okay, good job. In terms of, your job is to sell the product, so whatever. I'm not even sure, so we live in such ideological times that I'm not even sure if it matters anymore, whether you're going to make money. So I wonder whether these people have this kind of very closed frame of mind, very closed worldview, where they don't even understand that, that it's about making money. And Craig Beadle, who is here, have written about this, like how the ethics of capitalism, the idea that it's about money making, is seen by most people as something immoral. So maybe Gillette says, it's not enough that we sell good razors, we have to find a different rationale for our existence, which I think is very, very wrong. Okay, if you're a good company, it means that you provide some value, which is something which is, and also it means that you face the world in the proper, as I say, rational Apollonian way, right? Reality, this is what I'm going to do, these are going to be the results. I'm not even sure that companies today understand how moral their role is, and I use the term moral consciously, right? Making money by using your mind and providing value for value is moral. It's not something which becomes moral if I give them in charity. It's not something that is moral because I provide employment. It's moral in itself. The problem is that most companies do not understand this, and they think that morality will come from these extra kind of extracurricular, let's say, activities, which is really sad. More on that, if you want to see the dramatization of this, go read Atlas Shrugged, right? Dagny Taggart, my eternal kind of fictional crush, she's building the best railroad in history. And the journalist, before like the rail starts, they ask her, Miss Taggart, but haven't you got any message about society? You're only giving us these numbers, and you're only telling us why this is the best railroad. What about your social role? So, yeah, unfortunately, most business people haven't read Atlas Shrugged, which should be like first year, like compulsory reading in any business course, and the results is things like the Gillette ad and all that things that we see. I think you had your hand up, and then we go to the gentleman.
Me. So, as somebody who studied philosophy and values the truth, the issue with advertising I see is you're seeing these is celebrity endorsements, and say for example the Kim Kardashian one where Julia Jamil had a massive rant over the internet about it being like, this is, how, without such regulation, how do you promise truth in advertising?
Well, there are already consumer protection laws, so it is actually so strict that the EU is even considering banning veggie burgers as a term because people might think that they're made of meat, which I think goes a bit overboard. But there are already consumer protection laws against lying. I mean, I'm a big fan of companies making money from providing a service and value, but I'm not a big fan of anyone making money from lying. I don't think anyone in this room would be. So those laws already exist, and they should already exist. But so yeah, I think even those are now getting too extreme. In that, my friend Dan at the Adam Smith Institute had to go on radio and defend the rights of restaurants to call veggie burgers burgers because the government thought people wouldn't be able to know that they didn't have any meat in them.
That's a very cool question, because I portrayed advertising as almost a form of art, but that's a very legit question. What happens if advertising includes lying? I think if it includes straightforward lying, this is actually immoral. Sorry, not only moral, it should be illegal. If Brita was telling me that by using this, you're gonna gain 15 pounds of mass in the first 25 seconds, that's basically breach of contract, right? That's breach of contract, but the law is already providing for this. So when I say I support the rights of advertising industry, this doesn't mean I necessarily endorse it morally. So again, you might be doing something that I morally disapprove of. I could say, let's say, I don't like your boyfriend, right? But this doesn't mean that I should send someone with a gun by his belt to stop him from dating that guy. And that's how I see advertising. If advertising is, you could say, is, it portrays a world of extravagance, I would say, yeah, that's kind of towards the misleading. But if it's an outright lie, this is a breach of contract because it's promising you something that you don't get, which is already illegal as it should be illegal. So I don't think any of us is an ANCAP. So we believe that there is a role in the state to support contracts, and basically this is in a way a contract.
But yeah,
yes, sorry.
There's a really difficult line though, isn't there, between misrepresentation and lies, and adverts where you kind of know they're lying because, like, for example, face wash advertisements, like, oh, if you use it, you'll be happy like this model, and I know that's a lie, but I don't. It's a tricky one actually. The more I think about it, like, who decides what's misrepresentation that we should be aware of, that we kind of instinctively know is kind of a lie, but don't mind it, and what is outright breach of contract?
So the gentleman over there, and then we have the gentleman here.
So I would really like to go to the cinema and just have a nice time out and go and see a film without feeling that some director or some group of hired writers have an agenda to forcefully hammer down my throat over the course of an hour or two. And I'm kind of how do you think things are playing or might play out in Hollywood? I'm thinking about things like Star Wars and the sort of superhero films.
This mind, I forgot to mention something on the. Can I start with an answer on the previous? Because I forgot to mention a point. So someone mentioned, I think, Instagram and the issue of how do you call it when there's an advertisement?
An endorsement.
An endorsement.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna say something which is gonna show how shallow as a person I am. I was watching an 80 films with Chuck Norris, and throughout the film you can see a specific product being endorsed. Like the film starts and he drinks Pepsi. I was punching the air in excitement because I think they should have the right to do that. If Pepsi enters a deal with a director which says, we want you to portray Pepsi in each and every scene, that's their business, okay? Now, and also it's a film, it's fictional. Chuck Norris cannot beat Hezbollah or who were these people in Delta Force who, anyway, he cannot beat them by himself, right? So it's clearly like a fiction, so it's equally fictional that he drinks Pepsi and he does roundhouse kicks. So I'm not sure where I stand in this issue of this kind of advertising, but my kind of starting point would be that it's not a problem with it. Do you want to address the issue of the gentleman with the agenda in Hollywood? Because
Yeah. So I think that art is, any artist writing a poem, movie, book, anything, has their own worldview and will put their own worldview in that. And even by not even meaning to be political, might put forward, I mean, I do think your worldview is political, right? And so I don't think that there's any role for regulation or protection from artists creating art. And so if a lot of the movies you watch have messaging in them, political messaging that you disagree with, I think that we need to make movies that you would want to watch that don't have that messaging in it. And there are some movies and books, Atlas Shrugged, for example. So there is this really interesting debate in aesthetics about whether you can separate the author from the piece of work or the context from the piece of work. So should we read books or read poetry from that people have terrible political beliefs? Should we, for example, read Heidegger?
I'm not sure there's going to be that much art around if we're only allowed to appreciate art from people that are flawless and blameless.
Yeah, totally. Well, I'm not sure about Hollywood because I think a lot of the movies they produce, yes, do have a bit of a kind of woke underlying message in them, but some of them don't. And so
it's an unusual kind of art form in the sense it's very, very, very capital intensive. It takes a long time, huge amounts of money, and they want to get everybody into the tent and they alienate those. Me personally, looking at it with my business head on, I don't understand how to put the two things together. They've got a multi-million dollar global enterprise and they need to get, it's a volume thing. And on the other hand, well, we are going to play to this segment, are going to alienate, well, we don't like the little boys that turn up. This film is not for little boys. And why not? Don't you want their money? Why not?
I think that if they go down that route too much, their sales will totally drop because people will just stop watching something that is overly political. Like, I think movies, in order to be really, really good, need to appeal to something universal in the human story. And films and stories that don't do that, that alienate half the population or a section of the population, I don't think they'll do very well. And so you might see some self-correcting of this because it is a very recent phenomenon, I think, that you're describing. And also, the push for kind of token roles. So we've got to have, a female protagonist. I mean, like they changed Lord of the Hobbit movies to include a female character. I feel like I can relate to Aragorn and these male characters just as much as I can relate to a woman, though. Like, it's this idea that, you need to be, there's this debate about representation in films, and that might be why we're seeing an increase in, I think, a bit of tokenism. But that's quite condescending, because what they're trying to say is that I can't relate to the story of Aragorn or Gandalf or Frodo, so I love Lord of the Rings. I do feel like I have something in common with them, and I don't think that I need every superhero film or series to have a female hero in order to be able to relate to the hero story.
And it's, sorry.
I'm kind of aware that they'll take something and they'll, but the recent thing that really bothered me, there's never been a female hero like this before, and I'm thinking, hold on, there was Sigourney Weaver in Alien, and there's plenty of, there was Uma Thurman in Kill Bill as another very, very legitimately believable character, and I know the story is ridiculous, but a very powerful character nevertheless, and that didn't feel like preaching. They felt quite legitimate in their own right. So to me, it seems something very different has happened recently. We've had quite authentic, reasonable female leads in the past, and suddenly, we've never had one like this. No, we had better ones in the past, actually.
Yeah, I think a good story and good characters will inspire and make you want to relate, and you'll relate to them, and you'll see yourself in that story if it's well written and if the characters are really, really good, regardless of gender. And so I wouldn't want some film producer to say, well, we've got to have a woman in this, otherwise women won't enjoy the movie. But likewise, if a movie only had stories and only had experiences that I couldn't relate to, I probably wouldn't want to watch it.
But it's also, if you have most of the films being like what you mentioned, the really good ones now are really special. So, for example, when I watched Interstellar in the cinema, I realized what it means at the edge of my seat. I was like, I can't believe that I'm watching this brilliant movie. Right? So here we are in the world caring about sustainability and our, how's it called, our carbon footprint. And this guy says we've been living in this planet for too much, let's escape, basically. Let's think bigger, right? Or you have films like Whiplash. I don't think that Whiplash would have such an effect in the 60s. Because in the 60s you had this kind of achiever ethos. Whereas today, in this kind of mediocrity kind of culture, Whiplash is this brilliant film. And I would add in this list also La La Land. Because people say, you know, it's a musical. Actually, it has a very good message. The message is that sometimes in order to pursue your real dream, this is above even your romantic life, right? So it has this different kind of sense of life and different view kind of point of view. By the way, I've read in The Guardian that the La La Land is neoliberal because they choose career over romance. And also I've read someone else that it's problematic because Ryan Gosling is mansplaining jazz in that scene. So yeah, but no, great film. So yeah, it's what you said basically. The market's going to provide the solution, the kind of the counter example, which is going to be bright and nice.
And I think the popularity of hero movies shows that there's actually a craving and a desire to see that portrayed. The kind of hero story where they leave the house, face some dragons, and then become a better person, not, you know, kind of sit at home and live on welfare.
Slayers of dragons. I think the gentleman, and then I think there was a hand there, and there's a hand there. If I've missed someone, please remind me. Yes.
I wanted to see if you could talk about how markets create higher standards than whatever government standards can create. Whenever you trust a company like Whole Foods or John Lewis or Amazon, they provide you 30-day back return, and that talks about the consumer protection laws. When someone could be lying within an advertisement, you're trusting a company like Whole Foods that provides you more accuracy of what could be real or not than whatever government loss intervention. And it also gives a lot of opportunity for innovation. When you see an aging or aesthetic product that could be lying, you would be trusting that it's true, not because you trust the product, but you trust Whole Foods within its process and reasoning that it could be desirable.
I think we're preaching to the core if I say this, but I think most people here are, I guess they're convinced that this is the case. But why is this the case? This is mostly the case because it's what I said earlier. At the end of the day, capitalism has to be about the mind and rationality, right? So it has to be that I need to provide something that's going to appeal to people's mind, and therefore I need to put my best effort. I need to put my best self. As opposed to, I'm going to kind of push it down their throat, and even if it's crap, they're going to take it. The other day, I returned the mattress. I had 100 days to try it. It felt so good. As I said to Razi, like my faith to market is kind of... I gave a 5-star review, even though the mattress was not good and I returned, because it was this thing. We shake hands, and it's like, if you don't like it, we return it. I wish I could do the same with my council tax. Not happen. Have you got a comment?
Yeah, well, I think your comment about council tax kind of sums it up, doesn't it? Your experience of government services is rarely as a consumer, and the same experience as when you complain to a company. They don't seem to have the same consumer or patient focus, for example, in the NHS. And I think it's very interesting that there seems to be this development of trust in state and government, and trust in public bodies, and a lack of trust in the private sector, because government, people that work for the government, for these organizations that regulate our lives, they are also have human error. They are also human beings that will make mistakes, that maybe have bad judgments. In the same way that in the private sector, you will have companies where people make mistakes. But failure in the government is not really punished at all. And failure in business means that you lose your money, you don't have your customer base. And so I think it is very strange that our lived experience of liaising with public bodies like your local council is very, very bad. You get a very poor service. I'd like to hear from anyone that's had a good service from the local council. You'd be the first. But that's why I think markets are a better way of regulating these things, because you should be punished for failure. You know, if you've breached trust with customers, you should be punished. You know, other people will find out that you're not a very good supplier, and then you will lose your sales. And so I think that, yeah, I don't. There's this bizarre idea that a government bureaucrat is like this holy, you know, arbitrator of truth and knowledge, and has all the answers about your life, whereas companies are these evil organizations that are out to get you. They're just full of people, and I think that companies make mistakes and government makes mistakes, and I don't understand why there is this trust in government to solve all our problems, but this distrust of companies.
But here's what also many conservatives get wrong. This doesn't mean that companies cannot do mistakes. Actually, they always do, and we should morally condemn them. But it stops there, because, for example, a lot of people like Dave Sprague, specifically conservatives in the States, now they say Twitter is bad because it banned Milo or whatever. Therefore, Twitter should be regulated because now it has become this public provider, whatever that means. Okay, so we should be free to condemn them morally, boycott, whatever. But the fact that they did a mistake, something that I consider morally a mistake, shadow banning and things like that, doesn't mean that this gives rise to the governments to attack them. But also it works the other way around. The fact that I don't want the government to, I don't know, to impose their will on a company that sells food that I don't like because I don't like soya or sugar, for example, doesn't mean that I don't have the right to criticize that. I know it's very simple, but for some reason there are many people today in the conservative movement who seem to confuse these things. So there was a hand over there, or a hand over there. What do?
No, mine was actually just more a comment on the point that you were making, that we forget about female characters. But that's because all of that happened pre-woke movement, so it's unfortunate because we'll forget about those great female characters, for example, female others, because it came like pre-Hollywood woke.
Because the present generation of kids weren't born at the time when it was in the cinema.
Yeah, and also, you know, like Kill Bill, amazing film, but no one is going to remember that because it came out, you know, before we became sort of aware of writing female characters. So
it was just a good story, kind of thing.
But this is another thing with strong female characters, right? They're only good when they personify our values. That's what they led. For example, how many people celebrate Golda Meir? She was the Prime Minister of Israel when they faced a war that threatened their survival. And the way she dealt it, and I think Razi can correct me, wasn't she also the Prime Minister during the Edebe case, when that airplane was... But anyway, she was in charge in very, very, very difficult situations. No one in the left celebrates her. How many in the left celebrate Ayn Rand and the heroic women that she portrayed?
Well, Thatcher.
How many in the left celebrate Thatcher? Actually, it's the opposite. They want to diminish them. And here's the most interesting thing. What they say is, oh, but they were not really women, they say. So I remember a leftist telling me, Thatcher was more like a man.
A man in a dress. That's what
a man in a dress, yes. Which reminds, okay, I have a story with Ayn Rand related, but it's politically incorrect. So anyway, I'll tell it in the break. Yes. Oh, sorry. Can we go first there, and then I'll come back to you. Yes.
Okay. So what do you think about cigarette advertising? Because that kind of nullifies your arguments.
Why?
Well, cigarette advertising, do you think that's a good thing?
All right. So can I start with that?
I'm curious. I want to find out why you believe that nullifies our argument about advertisements.
Well, you're saying there shouldn't be regulation.
No, we're saying there shouldn't be a regulation on gender stereotypes.
Right, but this is you're talking about regulation.
I'll probably say I don't want cigarette advertising to be regulated. Now, does this mean that I endorse smoking, although I'm an occasional smoker? No. But again, we know, so if the cigarette packet would say, if you smoke, yes, that's true. So if the cigarette packet would say, you smoke this and you get multivitamins and you're going to live forever. Again, this is a breach of contract. This is a lie. However, so for example, I am 100% in favor of legalizing all drugs. This doesn't mean I would sell them to kids because this is something different. Why am I in favor of that? Because I believe in self-ownership. I own my body. That's one thing. I believe that someone has the right to sell me something, and if I enter a contract with you, I am the producer, let's say, of cocaine, and you have a radio station, and I want to put the advertisement on your radio station, I don't think anyone else has the moral stance to say you're not allowed to do this. Because my body, my choice. My product, my choice. Your radio station, your choice. Now, again, the usual reply I get on that is, what does this mean in the case of children? I agree that you shouldn't sell, obviously, cigarette and cocaine to children, but this does not nullify the principle. In the same way that if I call someone and say, I'm coming to your home to chop your head, it's not free speech. But be careful, this is not an exception to the rule of free speech. The rule on free speech is absolute. It's just that this case is different from free speech. So in the similar way, the fact that I consider cocaine snorting or cigarette smoking immoral doesn't mean that I want them banned. And since I don't want them banned, I can't see how I could justify banning the advertising on the ground of individual rights. If someone else has some idea on that, I would be very interesting to hear it.
I'm sure Chris does. This is his bread and butter.
Well, you know, I agree with you. They should be allowed to advertise them, but it should be decent, honest and truthful, which all advertising has to be in this country by law, apart from political advertising. It's the only exception. So I think you can certainly have tobacco advertising, but in order to make it decent and truthful, I think it's fair to have the warnings on there. So if you look at medicine advertising in America, which we don't have over here, you know, the TV adverts have such a long list of side effects listed that you can't believe anybody ever buys them. You know, it's more of the advertisement is dedicated to telling you all the potential things that might happen to you. Probably most of them very unlikely, actually. And I think you can do the same thing with tobacco advertising. I think so long as you have an appropriate warnings, and so long as the advert itself is not making untrue claims, I think that would be all right. But actually, I think the amount of warnings that I would consider appropriate would make tobacco companies think twice about advertising.
Right. And
do you think any progress has been made, say, over the last 50 years with cigarette advertising?
Sorry?
I said over the last 50 years, do you think there's been an improvement?
I don't consider it an improvement because it's basically banning. I consider it an improvement that more people are having a healthier lifestyle. My biggest eternal fight with my mother is I'm trying to persuade her to quit. I've bought her all sorts of electronic cigarettes. I've paid like a salary in the latest electronic cigarettes. She never uses them. I wish I could persuade her, but I'm not going to send the police to our home to make her stop smoking. Sorry?
I'm saying it should be banned.
Yes.
I said there's been progress. The warnings, they've got the cigarette packets, they hide cigarettes away in cupboards now.
I don't agree with that. I don't consider it progress, and also for the record, I don't consider progress the banning of smoking in pubs. Why though? Why is that? Because, again, it's my pub. I can put a poster saying, keep in mind, this pub is for smokers. I see it a bit like Sorry? Passive smoking. Passive smoking. So, the pub is private property. If someone enters the pub, first of all, people don't have a right to be served in my pub. I want to be free to put a sign in my pub saying, no one is allowed in my pub. I want to have a pub only for myself. I should have the right to do so. I see it a bit like martial arts. If I have an octagon where we do MMA, people enter the octagon with the knowledge that there's going to be some violence. If I have an octagon and I say, this is a cuddle group, and when someone enters the octagon, we do MMA, then I am misleading them. But if it's clear that this is an octagon, whoever enters the octagon has the understanding that things are going to happen there. So that's why I think at the end of the day, it's about your rights to your property, but also your rights not to mislead others. But a pub is not a property. A pub is private.
So it took legislation to bring in a smoking ban in nightclubs and pubs, but you don't think that's fair?
Not only I don't think that's fair, I think that's wrong. I think the legislation against smoking, I believe it's wrong. Occasionally, and as I said, I'm morally against smoking, and the longest battle of my life is trying to persuade my mother to, if you see me, I'm even saying it in public, to quit smoking.
Why
So,
are you trying to get your mother to quit smoking out of interest?
sorry, because it's very bad for her health. But I don't see where's the contradiction between what I'm saying and between me acknowledging that smoking is bad for the health. There's no contradiction here. I say that it's bad for you.
It took governments and legislation to point out to the cigarette companies that knew it caused cancer back in the 50s.
Oh, I agree with that. If
Tell people about
I agree with that. If the cigarette companies were saying smoking is good for you, I think
in the 1950s.
yes, and they're liable, and they should be liable to face.
They were taken to court over this.
Yes, and that's good because they were lying. They were basically breaching their contract.
Essentially.
Yeah, no disagreement with that.
Yeah, I think your
They were lying.
I think your
I agree
point
with you.
is that some regulation is good, and Nikos and I wouldn't disagree with that. We before in our response said that we agree with consumer protection legislation, but saying that this particular new regulation introduced is bad is not the same as saying as all regulation is wrong. And I think that's an important point to make. I think that might have been where you misunderstood what we were saying.
Yeah, we're not anarchists. We don't say, for example, that you should have the right to sell heroin and say this is good for you, or sell heroin to kids. But if someone wants to consume, if an adult wants to consume heroin, we can do two things at the same time. We can say this is wrong, don't do it, but at the same time we shouldn't point a gun at him and say if you do it, I'm going to throw you in a cage.
Okay, one more point.
Yes.
Advertising is designed to change your mindset. Okay? It's like brainwashing. So say, do you think I don't take heroin, but I go on TV, I start to see adverts about taking heroin, encouraging to take heroin. Do you think that's fair?
Yes.
If you see on TV advertising on heroin,
Saying, take heroin, it's great for you.
great for you what? It's going to improve your health. Yeah, again, that's...
No, it might just say it's great for you, like Coke is it. You know, every advertising has a slogan. It can be very...
Okay, if it says you take Coke and you're going to stay up all night, that's technically true. I wouldn't ban it.
Yeah,
I
but
wouldn't ban
like
it,
Chris
to be
said
honest.
with like the advertisements of medicines, you've got to say the side effects as well. Like I'm pretty sure that would be. I mean, I'm not as libertarian as Nikos in legalizing all drugs at the same time straight away. I'm kind of nearly there on cannabis, but I think if it was legalized, then it would just be quite sensible to make sure that if you're saying things like take this drug because it will make you feel great, you've also got to list the side effects, which is addiction. I think it's getting a bit boring now.
Let's take... Yeah, we have 5 more minutes, so let's take one more, or whatever we can fit in these 5 minutes. Yeah.
I was just going to point out that your whole argument about cigarettes is your own point, because once you have like even cigarettes selling out that they're really good, there are going to be people like him. They're going to go like, oh, well, they're actually not, and I should tell people they're actually not. And once you do that, like if you want the government to regulate everything, you kind of gives people the power not to think, because I heard this many times people say, I'm sure this is not bad because government is allowing this to happen, so it shouldn't be bad. And it's actually up to you and other people to tell you, like, no, let's make the research. Like, let's say for cannabis in the USA, I'm pretty sure they have more research on that now that it's legalized than they had before. And now they know exactly how it's bad in which way, and how it's good in which way. And it's helping a lot of people, and it's otherwise making a lot of people even worse. But they have the research, and they can debate about it.
And here's a more concrete example of that. Have you heard about the dark net? I'm technologically literate, so I don't know how to go to darknet, and I don't consume drugs. I can. There's also live stream, but that's a real statement. But here's the thing: there was some illicit drug markets in the darknet, such as Silk Road, and what happened there is research found that in Silk Road, drugs were of higher quality, which means less side effects. Why? Because Silk Road operated as Amazon. So you had people there. I've seen it I've written an article on that. I don't say you have to read it, but I'm just saying. So they said things like, we are ethical cocaine producers, which means we don't buy cocaine from drug dealers. We only buy from some doctors in Colombia that are starving and are kind of taking the cocaine from the holster or whatever. And we give parts of the earnings to poor Colombian farmers who are not under the mafia or things like that. So, but my argument on legalization is first and foremost on ethical grounds. But even if we go to the practical grounds, I think even in practical terms it's better, because you have this accountability. A lot of people who die from drugs die because it's of a very bad quality, or overdose, or how a wrong dose gone wrong, how does it go? Okay, again, I don't know, I'm not using them. But if you make the drug market more open, you're going to have more accountability, and it's going to be at the end of the day safer. Although, again, this would not be my first argument. My first argument would be my body, my choice. If I want to use drugs, no one can say anything to me. In the same way that no one can say to me, don't sleep with 5 guys, or don't do something that others might think it's unethical because of their religion or of their values or whatever. Any final thoughts?
We have time for a couple more questions.
So
You'll get there, don't worry.
Okay, if I don't get there, I blame you. Okay, yes?
So I think, going back to the original argument about gender advertising, I think the issue is sort of something that happens downstream from that, really, and it probably affects lots of other areas of our life. Because I haven't got any evidence for this, but I suspect the vast majority of people either don't care or wouldn't want the government to get involved with our advertising to that degree. But what we have is a noisy minority bullying the government to create these laws. So I think that's the problem that needs addressing. And not just lobbying for new laws, but I mean, there was this situation just this week with Roger Scruton being kicked off the government through a sort of little bit of a mob action. I think that's the area that needs addressing. I don't know how we do that. How do we do that?
I don't know, because they're using their freedom of speech, and there are a group of people who are very vocal, who really do believe strongly in changing the world in this way, in using government to socially construct or socially engineer and regulate all areas of our life. And if there are a group of people being very vocal about that believe strongly, well, what's the solution? Another group that disagree with them standing up and saying, actually, we disagree with you. And so I do believe that the majority, as you say, aren't too concerned about gender stereotypes and advertisements. But I don't think that there is a problem with people raising concerns. Like, I would disagree with the people calling for this regulation, but I don't want them to not have the freedom of speech to do so. Yeah, and so I think what needs to happen is we need to stand up and counter. Yeah. I think one of the problems is that if you do stand up against these regulations, like my friend Matthew Lesh went on BBC talking about the online harms legislation, is once you do put your head above the parapet, there's a lot of bullets coming your way, and so you don't want to be the first, and so then sometimes no one says anything, and so you have one very vocal person in a group who says we must do this thing, and then everyone's thinking that's a terrible idea, but no one's really got the guts to speak against that person because they're never going to shout back at them. I think that's the situation we find ourselves in, and the way we need to deal with it is by just being a little bit braver and being willing to take the hit and being, accused of all sorts of things, because when we do oppose these new regulations, I think we speak for the silent majority.
Yeah. But also the question is, where is the responsibility? For example, if a mob tries to, quote, bully my university to fire me because, oh, you have a lecturer who's an objectivist, I wouldn't blame for a moment the mob. I would blame the university if they would say, look, we've known you for some time, you're a good colleague, but we're going to succumb to the mob. So this is where you have to show a moral backbone and say, no, I don't care. And actually, I think if a company would do this today, this company would massively gain the respect of what you said, the silent majority. So it's the same thing with lobbying, right? Most people think that the powerful side is the lobbyist, but the lobbyists are paying billions and billions just because the power lies with the government. We could bring the example of Microsoft in the early 90s. They didn't even have lobbies. And then Washington completely destroyed them with that case, and then they had to lobby. So usually the responsibility lies with the decision maker, not with the person who is trying to influence the decision maker. They're morally wrong, we can condemn them. It's what we said with our friend over there about cigarette. We can condemn it, we can say it's morally wrong, but at the end of the day, that's something completely different from who is using the force or who is taking the decision to fire you. Having said that, firing you is not using force, it's not the same, I just used two different examples. But I think it makes sense what I'm saying. I don't judge the mob, I judge the people who don't have the moral backbone to say, get away. Any final thoughts, Telly?
Well, so you both agree that the government has a role in policing advertising. It's just you are here because what happened is this whole thing became a slippery slope and we're down the slope, we're going really fast, so you want to move it back. Well, I don't want a slippery slope at all. So what are your views on how to eliminate the slippery slope, how we can go back to a certain level and never ensure that it becomes like it has now, where we're in a slippery slope?
We have 2 minutes to address this that would need like 8 hours. First of all, I don't understand why you say that we both are, anyway. I don't think that the government has a role which goes beyond the role it has to protect individual rights. It's what I said. If I lie in advertising, it's not an issue of free speech, it's an issue of breach of contract. So I think this is not part of the slippery slope. How can you, do you have any starting thoughts?
Well, so I think what you're saying is like, how do we win the argument once and for all? And I'm really sorry, but I think we're just going to have to keep on making it. I don't think there's ever a point in time when we're not going to get to a stage where everyone in government says, okay, we're going to stop now. They're going to keep coming up with these crazy ideas and lots of things that we disagree with. And I think people that believe in individual freedom need to oppose that. I don't think that's ever going to happen though, because not everyone's always going to agree on what should and shouldn't be regulated, and so it's just going to be an ongoing process. And you know, maybe our grandkids will be doing speeches like this opposing new government rules and regulations. I don't think we're ever going to get to a point where like the size of the state just stays. We're just going to have to. There's going to be a back and forth between the left and the right for all eternity.
but here's like that's like fake advertisement. 2 easy steps to lose for a 6 apps. But here's 2 easy steps. First, the aim should be the complete division, the complete kind of dividing state and the economy. In the same way as with the, not divide, what's the term? Separation. The complete separation of state and the economy. But the way we should do this, and that's the second step, is we should make the moral argument. The moral argument. We shouldn't make the argument, that's nothing personal, I would use this example anyway, that maybe weed is good for your health, but cocaine is not good for your health. I think this argument, although I understand why it's appealing, I think this is not going to be successful in the long term. On the long term, the only argument that should be convincing is my body, my choice. It's my life, I can do whatever I want with this life, as long as I don't infringe on the lives of others. And once you make, for example, this argument, then you should be ready to face the arguments, what about the NHS? And then you should have a right answer about that, which is, there are other ways we can organize healthcare, but we need like
an hour.
We have one question from YouTube, and I think you already covered it, so I'll ask it anyway.
Yes.
So Kevin Brunt asks, can Nikos explain how individual rights are consumer protection?
How individual rights, okay, what are individual rights? Individual rights are basically, I have a right in my life. If I have a right in my life, I have a right in the products, right in my life. How do I live my life? I need to create stuff. Otherwise, I cannot survive. This means I need to be free, which means freedom of speech, freedom of thought. Also, right to your property. This includes the rights of the advertiser, because he has rights to his intellectual property, but also the rights of the consumer. The consumer has a right not to be lied to. Okay? So, in 20 seconds, this is how individual rights are related to consumer rights. Is this good?
Yeah, I'm good with that.
No, I mean, like, does this answer?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Giving the Ban Award to Transport for London, which, if you made it there safely today, I wish you
mentioned earlier, I believe, an advertisement designed to run on the London Underground because it contained bacon, butter and jam. So previously, on the 25th of February 2019, junk food advertising was banned completely on the entire TFL network, so tube, bus, whatever. And since then on, food and drink brands will only be able to place adverts which promote their healthier products rather than simply publicising their brands. And the measure is part of the Great Mayor of London's plan to decrease child obesity rates. And we, of course, tried to invite a representative from TfL to accept the award today, but unfortunately, but not necessarily unexpectedly, they did not send a representative, so the lovely Anna is here to accept it on her behalf.
No, because I would say, if it's money, I want to receive the prize.
Yeah, I'll take it.
Okay, bye.
Not imagine the truth.
Yes,
beautiful. Bacon and jam. Yes, as the lady said, so Chocolate for London ignored the invitation to attend today's event, so I'll be taking this award on their behalf and passing it on to them. But for argument's sake, and in their defense, I do want to say that obesity levels are unprecedentedly high, and while obviously sugary and fatty food advertised doesn't target children, specifically it's the vulnerable members of society that they want to protect, by removing this advertising, they remove temptation. And according to TfL, most Londoners agree with this view. So, and open for debate.
Anna, are you taking questions on behalf of TfL?
I mean, sure, what we can continue. No?
All right. Well, if there are no questions for TfL,
Any questions for TfL?
and it's not actually with TfL, we just need to make that very clear.
But someone had to obviously come and accept the award on their behalf, and we can debate later.
And we'll have a Q&A in the second panel if anybody wants to argue the TfL side, please do so. So we'll be back in about 15